My dad said it like he was reading a grocery list. No hesitation, no apology. Just, we used your college fund to cover your brother's down payment. He needed it. You understand? I was 31 years old, standing in my parents' kitchen in my work blazer because I'd driven straight from the office, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. And I just stood there. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I looked at my boyfriend across the table, the man I'd been dating for 2 years, the man my family had met exactly 4 times, and I watched something shift in his face. He didn't say anything yet. He just looked at my dad, then at me, and set his fork down very slowly. I want to go back further, because none of this makes sense without the context. And honestly, even with the context, it still barely makes sense. I'm the older one. I have one brother, 4 years younger. Let's call him what my mother always did, her baby. From the time he was about 6 years old, he had a kind of force field around him. You couldn't criticize him. You couldn't point out when he was wrong. If he cried, the whole house reorganized itself around his tears. If I cried, my mother would say, "You're so sensitive," and change the subject. I don't say this to make him sound like a monster. He's not. He's actually, in a lot of ways, just a normal guy who never had to develop the muscles you develop when life pushes back at you. He got everything handed to him, and so he never learned to carry anything himself. That's not entirely his fault, but it's not mine either. I was the one who got a part-time job at 16. My parents said it would build character. My brother didn't work in high school. They said he needed to focus on football. He quit football junior year. He never got a job. He still got a car for his 17th birthday. I got a used Honda Civic my senior year after I'd saved $2,000 of my own money toward it. I'm not keeping score. I genuinely stopped keeping score somewhere in my mid-20s because it was making me bitter and I didn't want to be bitter. I wanted to have a real relationship with my family. I made a deliberate decision to let it go, which is maybe why what happened with the college fund hit so differently. Here's the thing they left out when they told me it wasn't just a college fund. It was a specific account my maternal grandmother set up for me when I was 11. She came to visit one summer, and we spent a whole afternoon sitting on the back porch, and she told me, very seriously, like she was making a business deal, that she was putting money away for my education because she believed I was going to do something with my life. Her words. She looked me in the eye and she said, "This is yours, Leanne, no one else's." She died when I was 14. I never forgot that afternoon. I thought about it every time school got hard. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought about her believing in me before I fully believed in myself. My parents were the trustees on the account. I didn't find out until last year that they'd had access to it the whole time. I'd paid for college through a combination of scholarships, loans, and working 2 jobs my junior and senior year. I thought the fund was just tied up in some kind of process, that I'd be able to access it to start paying down my loans once I was established. I asked my dad about it maybe 3 or 4 times over the years. He always said the same thing. "It's fine, it's there, we'll sort it out." What I didn't know was that 4 years ago, when my brother wanted to buy a house, at 25, which he could not afford, my parents withdrew everything from my grandmother's account and gave it to him for a down payment. Just under $42,000. My grandmother's money. I found out not because they told me, but because my dad mentioned it at dinner, the dinner I'm describing now, in a voice that suggested I already knew. He was explaining why they couldn't help me with something relatively minor, and he referenced what we did for your brother, and when I asked him what he meant, he just explained it, flatly, like it was water under the bridge. "We used your college fund to cover your brother's down payment. He needed it. You understand," he said, "you understand the way people say it when they're not actually asking." My boyfriend, his name is Griffin, and I want to tell you about him properly because he matters, put his fork down. And then he said, very calmly, "Can you say that again? I want to make sure I heard you correctly." My dad blinked. Nobody talked to my dad that way. Not in that house. "We use the money," my dad repeated, slower, like Griffin might be hard of hearing. "It was sitting there. Her brother needed a real investment, a foundation. We made a judgment call. A judgment call, Griffin said. He wasn't being sarcastic. His voice was completely even. That was somehow worse for my father. With money that wasn't yours, my mother jumped in then, which is what she always does when my dad starts losing ground. It was a family decision. We didn't think Leanne would mind. She was already on her feet, she had her job, and her brother was really struggling. She's been paying off student loans for 6 years, Griffin said. Silence. She told me once, he continued, that she chose which utilities to pay every month for about 2 years after graduation because she couldn't cover all of them at once. That's your daughter. She was sitting in her apartment choosing between heat and internet, while her brother was buying a house. I hadn't actually thought about that period of my life in a long time. I'd done what I did with most of the harder years, folded them up and put them somewhere I didn't look. Hearing Griffin describe it out loud, in my parents' kitchen, with the overhead light humming and my mother's casserole going cold on the table, it cracked something open in my chest. I still didn't cry. I don't know why. I think I was in some kind of suspension. My dad's jaw tightened. It was a family decision, he said, echoing my mother. And family takes care of each other. Which family? Griffin asked. Because it doesn't sound like Leanne was included in that decision, or benefited from it. My brother wasn't at dinner that night. He lived 40 minutes away. I'm almost glad he wasn't there, because I think his presence would have collapsed me in a different way. There's something about facing your parents without the object of their preference in the room. It strips everything down to just you and the truth of how they see you. My dad turned to me then. I think he expected me to smooth it over, the way I always do. To say something like, "It's okay, Dad, I get it." To perform understanding I didn't have. "Leanne," he said, "you know we love you both equally." I looked at him for a long moment. "Dad," I said, "I've owed $48,000 in student loans since I was 22. I've been paying them for almost a decade. That money was supposed to be mine. Grandma set it up specifically for me. She told me herself. Your grandmother," my mother said carefully, "would have wanted us to do what was best for the family." I almost laughed. The audacity of invoking a woman she'd spent 30 years in a Cold War with to justify taking what that woman had given to me. "You don't get to speak for her," I said. It came out quiet. Solid. I surprised myself. My mother looked like I'd slapped her. She recovered fast. "I think you need to take a breath. You're getting emotional." "I'm being direct," I said. "That's different." Griffin reached under the table and put his hand on mine. Not to stop me, just to say, "I'm here. Keep going." So I kept going. "I've spent my whole life trying not to be a burden in this family," I said. "I worked my way through high school and college. I never asked you for anything. I took out loans instead of asking for help because I didn't want to cost you anything. And the whole time, there was $42,000 sitting in an account with my grandmother's name on it, money she left specifically for me, and you took it and gave it to my brother without even telling me. He needed," my dad started. "He needed it," I said. "Yeah, I heard you. I needed it too. I just never said so." That was the part that undid him, I think. He didn't have a comeback for that because it was simply, plainly true. Now I need to tell you about Griffin properly because the rest of this story doesn't make sense without it. I met him at a work event, not the cliché way, not at some networking cocktail hour where we bonded over hating networking cocktail hours. It was more mundane than that. I was trying to find a conference room in a building I'd never been in before, and I was very clearly lost, and he was leaning against a wall in the hallway eating a protein bar with the energy of someone who had no intention of helping anyone with anything. And then he said, "Third floor. South elevator. The signs in this building are basically decorative." We ended up in the same session. He asked if he could take me to coffee after, which was alarming to me because I was in my overthinking phase and I immediately started wondering if it was a networking ask or a real ask. It was a real ask. He was a software architect. He'd been doing independent contract work for about 3 years by the time we met, building systems for mid-sized companies. He was quiet about it in the way that people are quiet about things that are just part of their life, not a performance. He didn't mention what he made. He didn't mention his clients. He just talked about the work like it was interesting, because to him it was. My parents knew he worked in tech. They knew he had his own business. They assumed, I think, that it was a modest thing, because Griffin is not the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately recalibrates how people see him. He's the kind of person who will show up to your parents' house in a sensible car and help clear the table after dinner without being asked. What they did not know, what I had only recently fully understood the scope of myself, was that Griffin had built something real. He didn't talk about it, but I'd met some of his clients. I'd seen the contracts. I'd been there the morning he got off a call and sat quietly at the kitchen table for a moment and then said, "I think we might be able to pay off your loans." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, I just closed something significant," he said, "and I want to do that for you if you'll let me." I didn't let him right away. I have a complicated relationship with accepting help. We talked about it for weeks. It wasn't charity. We'd already started talking about a future together, about what that looked like, about combining lives. He wasn't offering to solve my problem. He was offering to make it our problem. There's a difference. I had not told my family about any of this. They didn't ask about his work specifically. They assumed he was doing fine, nothing more. That was fine with me. So when he sat at their kitchen table that evening and said, very carefully and without any heat, "I think you should know what you actually gave away." My parents had no idea what they were dealing with. My dad had been getting slightly dismissive. That's his move when he's cornered. He starts talking in a broader way, zooming out, making it about principles instead of specifics. He said something like, "Look, money comes and goes in families. What matters is that we were there for each of you when it counted." Griffin pulled out his phone. He didn't make a big show of it. He just set it on the table, face up, with a document open on the screen. "I've been helping Leanne look into this," he said. "There are a few things I think you should understand about what that account actually was." My dad looked at the phone, then at Griffin. "This isn't really, it was a custodial account," Griffin said, "with a specific beneficiary designation, your daughter. It was not a family asset. It was legally hers at the time it was transferred. I did not know he had done this research. I found out later he'd spent 3 evenings going through documents I'd stored in a folder I hadn't opened in years, and he'd made calls to a financial advisor and an attorney who was a friend of his. He did it quietly, without telling me, because he wanted to understand what we were actually dealing with before he said anything. That transfer," he continued, "may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. I'm not a lawyer, but my attorney is, and he thinks this is worth looking into." My mother's face went through 5 expressions in about 4 seconds. My dad went very still. "We didn't know," my mother started. "You knew it was her account," Griffin said. "Not unkindly, just directly. That's not in question." What followed was not a clean confrontation. Real life doesn't work that way. My dad got defensive. My mother started crying, which is her superpower. She can cry at a volume that makes you feel like the villain for having feelings of your own. My dad said some things he'd said before, variations on "we did what we thought was right and your grandmother would have understood." I said some things I'd been holding for years. Some of it came out clean, and some of it came out sideways. But then my dad, trying to regain some footing, said something that I think revealed more than he meant to. He said, "If Griffin were struggling, I'm sure you'd want us to help him too." And Griffin said, "I appreciate that, though I'm fortunate to be doing well enough that it's not a concern." And my dad sort of laughed, the way people laugh when they don't know what else to do. "Well, how well are we talking?" Griffin looked at him evenly. "Well enough that Leanne doesn't need anything from anyone in this room. Not anymore." My dad's expression changed. I watched it happen in slow motion. The recalibration, the reassessment, the sudden awareness that he might have made a different kind of mistake than he thought. My mother had stopped crying. I stood up. "I need you to hear me," I said. "Not him, me. This isn't about Griffin or his money or what he can or can't do for me. This is about the fact that you took something my grandmother left me and you gave it to my brother and you didn't tell me. And when I found out, your first instinct was to explain why it was okay. It's not okay. It was never okay. My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back. I love you, I said. I'm saying that so you know the next part comes from that same place. I can't keep showing up here and pretending that how you treat me is normal. I'm done doing that. We left shortly after. Griffin drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the streetlights blur past and felt something I didn't have a word for yet. Not quite relief. Not quite relief. Something between. Like a door had closed that I'd been holding open for a long time, and my arm was finally tired. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and surprisingly, I mostly meant it. It's been 8 months since that dinner. I've seen my parents twice. Once at a family gathering I went to out of a sense of obligation, and once when my mom called and asked if we could get coffee, just the two of us, because she wanted to talk. We talked. It was hard and imperfect, and she didn't apologize so much as express regret in the way that people do when they're sorry they got caught more than sorry for the thing itself. I told her I needed time. She nodded like she understood. My brother called me once, about 6 weeks after. I think my parents told him some version of what happened. He was awkward on the phone. He always is with me, because I think on some level he has always known, without anyone ever saying it, that the balance was off. He said, "I didn't know where the money came from, Leanne. If I had known." I said, "I know." And I do believe him, mostly. But also, I think the more honest truth is that he didn't ask. That's the thing about growing up as the preferred one. You don't learn to ask where things come from because things have always just appeared. The loans are paid off now, all of them. Griffin and I worked it out together over a few months, like he said we would. We sat at our kitchen table in the apartment we share now, and we paid the last installment on a Thursday morning, and I made us coffee, and we just sat there for a minute, not saying anything. It was one of the best moments of my life. Small and private and entirely ours. I think about my grandmother sometimes. That afternoon on the back porch, the way she looked at me like she was making a bet she was certain she'd win. I'd like to think she'd be proud. Not of the drama, not of the confrontation, but of the part where I stopped making myself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. She told me that money was mine. Turns out she was right about more than the account. Some people teach you that love looks like sacrifice, that you should fold yourself down and take up less space and ask for less and never say out loud when you've been wronged, because keeping the peace is more important than the peace being real. I believed that for a long time. I believed it so hard I nearly convinced myself that what was done to me was reasonable. It wasn't. And the moment I stopped pretending it was, everything started to make more sense. Not easier. Sense. I'm not waiting for a full apology. I'm not holding my breath for the day my parents look me in the eye and say they got it wrong. Maybe that day comes, maybe it doesn't. What I know is that I don't need it the way I used to, because I'm not building my life on a foundation that requires their acknowledgement to feel solid. Griffin proposed last spring. In our kitchen, of all places, which is very him. No grand gesture, no restaurant, just a quiet morning and a question and a ring he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks because he kept almost doing it and then talking himself out of the timing. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We're getting married in October, small, outdoors, people who actually want to be there. I paid for it myself. There's a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I nod at my dad across that kitchen table and say, "It's okay, I understand," and drive home and cry in the parking lot of my apartment complex, and then get up the next morning and go to work and never say anything to anyone. I almost lived that version. I came very close. What I've been thinking about these past 8 months is how much of my life I spent earning things that were already mine. Not just the money, though, yes, the $42,000 my grandmother set aside specifically for me, the money I thought about every time a loan payment cleared and my account balance dropped below comfortable. But also smaller things, the right to take up space in a conversation, the right to feel wronged without immediately wondering if I was being too sensitive. The right to expect that the people who loved me would treat me with the same basic fairness they'd want for themselves. My grandmother understood something my parents never quite did. She sat with me on that back porch when I was 11 years old and she made me a promise. Not because I was the loudest or the most demanding, but because she'd been watching. She saw something in me that was worth betting on. And she put her money where her belief was. That's integrity. That's what it looks like when your actions match your values. When you do right by someone not because it's convenient, but because it's correct. Griffin did the same thing, in his own way. He spent 3 evenings going through documents I'd forgotten I had. He called a financial advisor. He made quiet preparations before he ever said a word out loud because he wanted to understand the truth before he spoke to it. That kind of clarity, the discipline to think before you react, to gather facts instead of just feelings. That's what kept that conversation from becoming a screaming match. That's what made it matter. And I had to find something in myself too, in that moment. Because when my dad looked at me and waited for me to smooth it over the way I always had, I had to choose. Between the comfortable lie and the harder truth. Between keeping the peace and keeping my self-respect. I'd spent so long being the one who adjusted, who accommodated, who shrank, and I had done it thinking that was what love required. It took until I was 31 years old, standing in a kitchen where I'd grown up feeling like a guest, to understand that love doesn't actually ask you to disappear. My grandmother's money is gone. I've made peace with the fact that I will probably never see it. Not in any form that looks like repayment, but what I got instead. The loans paid off, yes, but more than that, the knowledge that I can stand up straight in a hard moment and say what's true, that's worth more than I can calculate. The loans are gone now. I paid the last one on a Thursday morning at our kitchen table. Griffin across from me with his coffee. Both of us just sitting quietly in it for a minute. And I thought about her. I hope she'd recognize what she started. Not the drama, not any of it, just the part where I stopped letting people treat my worth as negotiable.